going to be another exciting show for tonight, Life Without Limits. And tonight we have a guest that we have been trying forever to get her on the show. And we'll talk about that briefly, about the history of trying to get her on the show. But before we get started, I want to answer just a few of the questions from a previous guest. And she talked about her life through sexual exploitation from the age of 10 to the age of 20. And that was an intense show. And so we had a couple of questions that came through, and I want to go ahead and answer those. And the question that not in another, I think, it was in reference to how she saw sex at a very young age. And Bonnie said, yes, people have extremely different thoughts of sex and what it stands for. And being that age that, 10, 11, 12 years old, you didn't know what it was. I mean, if you got involved with that as she did, she thought that was normal behavior. And it's hard for people from the outside looking in, but that's what she went through. And Kaylee asked, did no one ever say different, or did you ask anyone? And she said, both. I asked a question to my best friend at age 16 after telling her a 40-year-old had forced me to have sex with him on my school lunch break. And she said, that was not surprising and unexpected. Her response shocked me. I couldn't believe she could have known that would happen. Everyone else acted like that was normal, and she made it sound like only I would go through things. It was a huge wake-up call that other girls don't have sex with older men or get raped at all, period. I had thought everyone was sexually active with adults because all the adults had and did absolutely nothing. And Thomas asked, did you feel like you were robbed of your childhood? Yes, a million times yes, and I think about it all the time. This is why I feel so strong at the age of 22. I'm a school teacher and pushing to open my own school in Guatemala for January of 2022. My non-existent childhood unleashed a beast of consistent methods of child protection, education, and productivity. And the last question I have is, why would a cop say that to a child? Basically, she was saying that the cop said that absolutely that she deserved it. I don't remember exactly what she said. It's been a while since she was on the show, but the cop did not give her any kind of support. And she said, I do not fit the stereotype of exploited children to many cops. A lot of cops have launched in my face, made jokes about trafficking to me, and horrible sexual statements while I was reaching out for help. And Kyla asked, did your parents know you had a baby? Yes, my father was very angry at me while having more confidence and compassion for the man who impregnated me. My mom had dug herself into work more and more, and I'm thankful to have had a roof over my head during pregnancy, but that is all I can thank them for. We have never had a healthy or tolerable relationship, as you can imagine. For anybody who wants to watch or listen to that show, go back to listen to it on iHeartRadio, and it was a very intense show. So my guest tonight is Denise Michelle. And just a little history with Denise. Back in, I think, April or May, she was supposed to be on my show. And oddly enough, there was a fire, not just one small fire. It was a big, huge forest fire, right, Denise?
Yeah, that's correct. Wildfire in the Santa Monica Mountains, actually.
Yeah, and it happened around the time they were supposed to have the show. And it was unforeseen, and I can't remember how I was able to salvage something that night, but we did. And then we tried it again, and then her dog had passed away the day that we were supposed to have the show. And obviously, I'm not going to put someone on the show for if they're going through, even with a dog dying, because I've had cats who've died, and it's been devastating. And she's gone through a lot of different challenges since then. But we were persistent, right, Denise? We said, we're going to get this done. So I am so grateful that we were able to do this. So,
me too.
So thanks for coming on my show.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here, Tom.
All right, I'm going to give a short bio with Denise. She is a self-love alchemist, a certified transformational life coach, a rapid transformation hypnotherapist, and #1 international best-selling author with it's called Asian Women Who Boss Up: Secrets from Women Who Are Forging Their Path and Thriving. And she's creator of Hypno Healing, Think and Grow Rich in Structure, and self-love expert with a background in the healing arts and spiritual entrepreneurship. And she dedicates her deep connection with spirit and self-love education to help healers, spiritual entrepreneurs, and influencers in the path to serve the collective. And her journey, her 20-year journey is incredible. She's beaten the odds with mental illness, sexual abuse, addiction, anxiety, suicidal depression, bankruptcy, and is on a mission to help others to rise. So we have a lot to unpack here, Denise. So
Yeah.
I want to get started with the show so we can get your story in. And when we talked way back in, I don't know, it was probably March when we first connected. You mentioned to me that you were you were not allowed to live the life you wanted growing up. Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it was really a mindset issue with my parents who I didn't exactly live a cookie cutter life, as a child. My parents fought a lot. They were completely incompatible. I did not know I had emotional dysregulation, which was eventually called borderline personality disorder. I didn't so basically anything that I really kind of wanted to do as a child would get shut down in a way. I just remember when I was 3 years old and I wanted to be a gymnast so bad. And I had told my dad that, and I said, I want to be in gymnastics. I don't want to be in ballet. I want to be in gymnastics. And he said, honey, we can't afford it. So that actually created a subconscious block in my mind, thinking that I can't afford my dreams. So what's the point? So that would, like, basically, money would be a huge issue in my family growing up and not being able to afford the things that I wanted. And so I basically, just like the book says, I had to forge my own path and find other ways to start creating my life.
Now that's a lot of people have gone through that. In fact, I went through that. I grew up with four brothers, and we didn't have money. But your situation is more of an emotional and mental level, because you attached that to your inability to find out, even at that early age, that things you want to do you couldn't do, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and because my parents didn't understand that the emotional stuff that I was going through actually had merit, they just kind of saw it as, oh, well, she's, throwing another tantrum, or, she's just in a mood. And so that's kind of what I felt. I just felt like I wasn't seen or heard, which really made me feel not loved in a lot of ways. Not that my parents didn't show me affection, but they didn't know how to talk to me. They weren't giving me the right affection that I actually needed to grow and emotionally develop.
Now, let's talk about this for a second, because when we talked previous, showed you love, but it wasn't the kind of love that you would expect from a parent. How did that affect you?
Well, I would say that I would receive. Well, my dad was more affectionate than my mom. She seemed to be kind of uncomfortable with physical affection. My dad was more, he would kiss us. And my mom was more about, she would make us things. She was a seamstress and a designer, so she would do things, I guess if you call it in a love language, of acts of service. That would kind of be her way of showing her love. But that was not my love language. My love language was quality time and physical touch. So when I wasn't receiving quality time and attention, that's where I really struggled. But of course, as a small child, you don't know this stuff, right? And so I would go on basically a quest for love, which led me into what I'm doing now.
But the thing is, because we talked about when you first got on the show, you talked about borderline personality. I've read about it. We're diagnosed with that.
I don't know. Can you repeat that, Tom? For some reason, it cut
I said,
out.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right, I'll cut it short here. Basically, originally you said that you were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Can you explain again what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was 26, I knew that I had emotional issues, and it was starting to really affect my relationships, to the point where my significant others, they did not know what to do with it. I would have these kind of freakouts, which would really turn into psychotic episodes where I was just emotionally uncontrollable and I did not know what was going on until one day somebody told me, like, you are emotionally unstable. Well, I looked it up on the internet. This is back in 2005, and there it was, black and white, borderline personality disorder. And I was like, oh my God. And everything from emotional dysregulation to black and white thinking to dissociation to not understanding, to having, really dysfunctional relationships. It was all there in black and white. And I was like, whoa, this is my life to a T. And there are 9 different criteria, and I actually met all 9. Some of them much worse than others. But if anybody looks at what borderline personality, all actually have aspects of BPD. It's just because I felt them so significantly and extremely that it wasn't like I had healthy amounts of anger. I would go from 0 to 60 in rage because I had no filter. I didn't understand what healthy anger was or healthy sadness. I didn't even know what happiness was. So, emotionally, I was so underdeveloped and I had zero coping skills. And it was really affecting my quality of life to the point where, well, I wanted to.
You said you wanted to die. Can you talk about that when you got to that point?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it first started as a teenager, when I was about 13, 14 years old, when I felt like people didn't understand me. And that would actually be my first suicide attempt when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just imagine, my father ended up coming to the hospital with me, and I had to go. I won't go into the gory details of everything that
Right.
happened, but I was terrified as a 14-year-old child. And, for me, I really look at that as, there was a problem in our mental health care system, because basically I had been telling the counselors at school, something is wrong. Nobody will treat me, and I don't know what to do. And basically they told me, well, you haven't tried to take your life, so you're not qualified for counseling.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on.
So, right. And so, of course, what do? Is I think that there's no way out, there's no other way. And that was my cry for help. And I
Well,
finally got into counseling after that.
yeah, but that was, I mean, yes, 14 years old, and then you didn't find out until 26. There's a lot of years of this turmoil and angst for those 8 years. I mean, it wasn't there anything that could help you as far as getting therapy or going anywhere to get help?
Well, I dove into my studies, to be honest. My sister and I ended up moving from Michigan to North Carolina with my mother. And this is now my third high school. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. And I met this group of friends. I kind of call us the misfits of our school. We were like the punk rockers. People didn't love us, but I felt really seen and heard and loved by these people. And they were all extremely smart. We were all smart. We were all in honor society and beta club and things like that. We just looked different. So I would say having that core group of friends and starting to feel accepted, that's what started to drive me in, oh my gosh, I finally feel love in my life. And it wasn't obviously until years later that I would discover that, this thing was ailing me. And it was mainly because I started having consequences to my actions. I didn't understand. I would let people in just enough and they would accept if I had a mood swing, and I would turn like that. But what shifted was I actually started to feel remorse. And that's when I was like, all right, something's wrong. I need help.
Was this like when you were out of school or during school or?
Out of school. I was about 22 years old, and I had a boyfriend that he was the first boyfriend that I truly loved. He was my best friend. He really saw me, and I saw him, and I realized, like, one day we were hanging out, and I just my mood, it just shifted, and I couldn't even begin to explain what was happening inside of me. And that's how twisted my mind was. Like, if you can even think of like a ball of twine, that's the triggers that would happen. He would say something completely out of the ordinary, but it would trigger an old emotion, something that I had no idea was living inside of me. And I would be reacting to an old event in the now. So it completely, I ended up having this freak out on him, and he freaked out, and I ended up hurting him emotionally so badly that he lived in Boston at the time. I lived in Los Angeles, and I was flying home, and I remember writing a letter to him, and it was almost my declaration that I'm going to get help. As soon as I get home, I'm finding a therapist. I can't live like this anymore because I don't want to hurt you.
And
I'm sorry. It just cut out again. Sorry about that.
Okay, and did you get the help that you said you were going to do?
I did. And so that was the thing, is that when things came to me, I was very quick at taking action. And so I found a counselor. But the thing is that they were treating me for depression. They were treating me for anxiety. They were treating me for sexual abuse, but they were not treating me for borderline. Because on the outside, I was functioning. I was going to school. I was getting a degree. I was working full time. So on the outside, I looked completely normal. They call it a functioning borderline. But, behind closed doors and underneath it all, it was a mess. And I couldn't, when I was in my head all the time, I felt like the whole world was watching me, and I had to be a certain way because otherwise I would just completely fall apart. And I eventually did.
I would imagine. I've been married almost 32 years now, and I understand being on this end of it, because when you have an argument with your significant other, and I'm not saying I'm not perfect, or I am not perfect for and she'll tell you that too. But the thing is when you get in that heat of the moment and things like this, you always wonder what's going on in your head. What are you thinking? Why are you thinking that way? And then you're thinking to yourself, there's nothing. I understand that I feel this way, but I have no control over it.
Right.
So how do you do that then? I mean, how do you deal with that in a kind of relationship?
Well, I mean, currently in a relationship, I mean, basically it comes down to awareness, being aware of, okay, well, that wasn't in my normal wheelhouse of emotions. What's going on here? And digging deeper. And that's the thing, is that, taking time out to take that pause and to reflect and be like, whoa, that was an extreme. That wasn't normal for what how I normally present myself. So there must be something going on. And that's what it takes, is just taking a deeper look with, where did it come from? Why is it happening? Is it something that I have buried underneath that I just have not dealt with? And you can find this out a number of ways, whether it's working through a therapist or journaling. It's a deep dive into yourself. And we're not here to be perfect. Our relationships are reflections to help us grow, and then and to help us become our authentic selves. So our relationships, to me, are such a gift. And being with a spouse, if you've been with your wife for 32 years, that's a safe container for you to be in that space of growth with each other. Right?
Right, exactly. I hear you. I hear you. But what's nice about you is you decided not to live in that space, and your life changed when you found yoga at an early age. How did that change your life?
Well, yoga, I found yoga when I was about 20 years old, just out of curiosity. And it wouldn't be another, I think it was 3 or 4 years until I felt the which is the yoga, the unity of mind, body, and spirit. And I was in a bhakti yoga class, which is called yoga of devotion, yoga of the heart. And this particular teacher, he was my first real, I guess, guide when it came to like my spiritual awakening. And I just remember one day in class, I felt at such peace, and it was only for a moment. And then it went away. But I kept going back to class because I was like, well, this is where I start to ease my suffering. And that's how yoga started to transform me, especially after I got diagnosed. That's when my first thought, or maybe I can help others the way that my teachers have helped me. But I didn't even have, or wasn't even close to having the confidence to become a teacher until a couple of years later after I went into formal treatment.
And when did you decide that you wanted to start your own studio?
It was after treatment when I was 28. We're kind of going chronologically here. When I was 28,
Yeah.
I went into treatment at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and I mean, this was a big deal. I had to leave my job of almost 10 years to save my life. I literally could not handle functioning at a job anymore. I knew that I was ready to die. And so I basically checked myself into outpatient treatment at Cedars-Sinai in a program called Dialectical Behavior Therapy. And I was in therapy for 10 hours a week. And it was so basically what that program was, it taught me coping skills, dialectical skills, really learning how to understand my interpersonal relationships and the dysregulation and everything that was happening. And then I had to basically, like, it was like full of twine had to get unwound, and then I had to create a whole new person. And it was in treatment where I had said to my therapist, I want to be a yoga teacher. And one day I did. I mean, I gained the courage. I went to a yoga chanting event, and that was the first time that I closed my eyes and I danced and I sang and I just chanted, and I didn't care who was looking at me. That was the first time in my life that I didn't feel like the world was watching me. And even if they were, it didn't matter. And that's when I got the courage and I signed up to become a yoga teacher, which led me into teaching at a studio. And then I realized, well, I'm in Santa Monica, California, which is like the mecca of yoga. If I don't want to go back in the corporate world, I got to think of something fast. So I thought of yoga in the workplace, and I ended up asking some friends. Somebody hooked me up with their building in downtown LA. Loved the idea, and they basically rented me a space for cheap, and that's how I started. So I didn't even start a studio like on purpose. I just really wanted to start building my career, thinking like I was going to do yoga in the workplace. And I eventually turned that into a studio, and it was a successful studio. I mean, we helped thousands of people over those 5 years.
And another challenge came in your life. You had an accident and you had to close your studio. What happened there?
That was the surfing accident. So
Yeah.
basically, it's kind of as like funny, haha, in a way. So because my whole life was yoga, my hobby was yoga, my work was yoga, it was a bit too much. So I ended up taking up surfing and fell in love with it. Well, surfing ended up becoming an addiction, which that addiction wasn't good because because I started checking out of my life. I was so burnt out with working at the studio week for a good 5 years. Um, I was exhausted, and that was the one thing that I didn't have was my self-care. Here I am preaching all this stuff to my students, yet I wasn't practicing those things because I felt like I was on a hamster wheel and I couldn't get off. And surfing was the only thing that could really get me there. Was to distract me. Well, that and weed, honestly. So I was smoking a lot of weed and surfing all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Um,
Perfect
not a
stereotype,
good
right?
combination. Not a good
Yeah.
combination.
And you're
So
probably seeing dude a lot too, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so I went surfing one day, and listen, here's the thing, is that whenever you're going through a spiritual awakening, you get nudges, you get whispers, you get these downloads that are saying, hey, you're going the wrong direction. And it's a matter of you either listening or just completely ignoring it. I ignored it. I knew I was getting those whispers and those nudges. But instead, at this time, I decided I wanted to sell the yoga studio, be done with it, go surf the world for a year. And I had no idea what I would do after that.
Mm.
But somehow, spiritually, right? Spirit knew that that was not my path. My path was here to serve. And so basically, I go and surf one day, and the surfboard smashes me in the face underwater, basically uppercuts me, splits me to the bone where I needed 29 stitches, and
Mm.
it ripped me open emotionally. Um, it forced me to go back into therapy. And that's when I started doing like all the very interesting and somewhat strange woo woo practices and healing. And, these are the things that insurance won't pay for.
Yeah.
Type of thing, which is eventually, and we'll get there, why I ended up claiming bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So that surfing accident was my rude awakening to what I was here to do on this planet.
Yeah. When you get to that point, because I remember when we first talked, you mentioned to me, interesting. You said you had a little. You thought about this a lot. You said that you didn't completely help you because at some point you gave yourself 24 hours to find out a reason to keep living. What happened there?
Yeah, well, that was when I was 28, right before treatment. That was the first time I heard that whisper. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really interesting the way it happened, because I just remember sitting down on my bed and I had tears rolling down my eyes, and I just felt so deflated and defeated inside. And it was just, I was just, I just knew, okay, now it's time to start planning my death. I have 24 hours because there's nowhere else to go. I don't know what else. And, it wasn't like, when people think of ending their life. I mean, or maybe people haven't thought of this, but in my experience of it, I became very at peace with it. I had made peace with death. So it was just a matter of execution, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then I heard the whisper, and it was so loud, and I don't know where it came from, but I heard, it's time. And I didn't know what that meant. I was like, time for what? It's time for you to get help. And I'm like, but I've been getting help. No, it's time for you to leave your job and get some serious help. And I don't know how I'm going to do that. I don't have the means to just quit my job. And then I heard the whisper, short-term disability. And I was like, oh my God, all my benefits. The benefits that I had worked so hard for, my 401k, long-term disability, short-term all that stuff I'd been paying into for almost 10 years, now finally had a purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
that saved me, honestly. I was able to go get that treatment. And because I had such excellent benefits, I paid very little out of pocket to save my life.
Well, and then you also had all the different other treatments after the injury and all that sort of stuff that you went through.
Yeah.
That put you in bankruptcy.
Yeah. That was eventual. Yeah.
So you eventually got involved with hypnotherapy. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So hypnotherapy came after I became a certified life coach. And I realized that the clients that I had were not your average clients. Like I was like, whoa, these are like spiritual warriors. And I kind of looked at my life and I was like, wow, I've kind of been a warrior myself. So obviously this is like who I'm attracting. And so my coach ended up saying, he said, I think you're onto something. You are a coach's coach. And I was like, damn, you see that too, huh? And
Yeah.
and the tools that I had learned to help them when their traumas came up did not go deep enough. And so I had to start digging because I'm like, we got to start breaking through this stuff. I don't have time to be putting band-aids. These are people who are in service and, who are in enough. I need something to just like bulldoze through that. There's got to be something out there. And I started thinking about like, well, how did you heal borderline personality disorder? Because that was intense. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I can start going that way. But I was like, all right, this is taking too long. Anyway, Marissa Peer comes into my periphery through a friend, and I go to her seminar and I am just blown away by her method. I had never been hypnotized before because I think, I used to think hypnotherapy and you kind of think of like the entertainers who are hypnotherapists, who are,
Right.
they're going to make you cluck like a chicken and whatever, and, I didn't really understand the concept of the subconscious mind until Marissa Peer. And after going to her seminar, I was like, okay, I have to study this. Like, this is going to be an integral part of my work. And so I did it, went back into into new certification and did the thing, went to London, studied with her, became a hypnotherapist. And I guess the rest is history.
Time is at a premium here, but I want to in today's world. You lost your mother to COVID. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this is in December of 2020, so just last year. And well, my mom basically went into the hospital. I took her. She was with me for Thanksgiving, and she had diabetes. She did have health issues. And I had just noticed some swelling in her legs. And so I decided to take her to the hospital, and they admitted her. But what I thought would be a couple days turned into 2 weeks that she was there. They ended up putting her on dialysis and doing all this physical and occupational therapy on her. I mean, she was exhausted. She was 75 years old. She was fighting. She was her life. And the day that she was going to get discharged into my care, she called and she said, I have COVID. And obviously she got it at the hospital. So this is when me and my two sisters, one of my sisters is in the medical field. She has been researching COVID since the very beginning. So she basically knew the structure of how it starts to take over your body. And I said, well, look, I just be real. What can we expect through this? And she said, well, if it turns out, she said, mom may not have the experience that some of these other people do, and we pray that she doesn't, but if she does, this is what happens. And so she kind of told me, and so she said between days 5 and 7 would be the days that we have to really watch out for. And she was right, because my mother ended up getting pneumonia. The pneumonia turned into her needing oxygen. The oxygen turned into her getting sent to ICU, and where it took her life. And it was so fast. It was just so fast that it happened. I mean, I talked to her the night before, and she was terrified. She couldn't breathe. She was panicked. She had a lot of anxiety. We were trying to keep her calm. We couldn't see her. The hospital wouldn't let us visit or anything. And so, and then the next day, she lost her battle to it, and it happened so quickly. And I would say ever since then, I am not the same person that I was on December 17th, which is the day before she passed.
Which means what?
It changed me. It changed every aspect of me.
How so?
Well, for one, experiencing COVID death from a loved one is extremely atypical. Not a lot of people can understand the grief that comes along with that. It's not, the fact that we couldn't say goodbye, there's so many things that are unfair about the way she left the world.
Right.
And as her daughters, it was kind of traumatic in a way, because here in LA, the mortuaries were so backed up that they couldn't even get to her for 2 months. And when those
2 months.
Yep. And when those 2 months were finally up, and this was now, I had to go and do the cremation. And it was intense. It was intense because I was alone. I couldn't be with anybody there. And my sister was on Zoom, and I had to see my mother like that after 2 months and be in that room with her body. And it was difficult. It was really difficult. It still, I don't want to say haunts me to this day, but I'm still processing it to this day. There's a little bit of PTSD around that experience. And that's just, a portion of it. We still haven't even had a proper funeral for her yet, because it's so, because the pandemic, we haven't really been able to, our family hasn't felt safe enough to gather. So we haven't had a proper funeral. We did have a memorial that was online for her. But yeah, there's still some open ends there.
I thank you so much for sharing. I apologize if that was uncomfortable.
No.
But I know we wanted to talk about it. I think it was important.
Yeah. I'm happy to share. I think that people, they don't, regardless of whatever people's views on COVID are, I'm a person who has experienced it in a way that is probably somebody's worst nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to talk about it, because I think that these experiences should be talked about, just to bring awareness to us as human beings, to our just increasing our own emotional intelligence when it comes to feeling our feelings. That is so vital to our existence, that we cannot just keep shoving things under the rug. We have to actually face these things that are occurring in our lives.
I totally agree. Now with COVID, I'm trying to figure out what your ethnicity is, but we've seen how the Asian community, they've experienced extreme discrimination that's unwarranted, obviously. Have you experienced that kind of discrimination?
Personally, I have, in my younger years. Now, not so much, but in my younger years, I did when I was a child, because kids didn't know, because I'm half Filipino. Kids didn't know what a mixed Asian kid was. They were like, "Are you white or are you black?" And I'm like, I don't know. I'm
Hmm.
Asian,
Yeah.
like, and then they would ask, why are your eyes like this? Or why does your nose, why, they'd press their nose down and say my nose was flat. And
Yeah.
kids are mean. They're mean, and it's not their fault. They were ignorant. I mean, to be honest, because their parents didn't necessarily know how to educate their children on mixed races. And I lived in a predominantly Caucasian area at that time.
Now, since you decided to forge into this different Asian authors, and again, it's called what's it called again there?
It is
Asian
called,
women,
yep,
Asian
Asian
women who
Women Who Boss.
boss up.
Yep,
Um,
got it here.
what was the message you were trying to get across?
Well, I mean, it's really, my chapter is a short chapter to synopsis of my life. It's basically a precursor for the longer book to come, which is my solo book,
Mm.
which is not yet fully in the making, but it is in the making in my mind. And every story in here is so fascinating because all of these women have been through so much. We get so raw in this book. I love it. I mean, we talk addiction, we talk bankruptcy, we talk, even generational stuff, the stereotypes of being Asian, and the things that were are, were or can be expected of young Asian girls, growing up in a society and not necessarily becoming entrepreneurs, going against the norm, I guess you can say. Like, I look at us and I'm like, oh my God, we're so strong. Like, we're
Hmm.
so strong.
You still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we're just having little technical issues here. How can people find your book?
Okay, so people can go to my website at bridgethelove.com. And the book is there, so you can totally you'll be able to find it under my products. I think it might say even book. It's easy to find, and it's a great book. So I highly suggest getting it. And I'll sign a copy for you and send you
Oh,
a little fun note.
awesome. Awesome. Okay. Normally, I'm going to the 50 after with my guest, and thank you for coming on my show, Michelle. And I don't do this very often, but I'm going to give my own commentary. And this goes briefly what we talked about with COVID. And so I came up with something. I wanted to get this off my chest, guys, because it's just wearing on me. And I want to read this, and then if if you send me email that you disagree with what I have to say, that's perfectly fine, because this is society, is you can not agree with everything everyone else says, but this is my feelings. So here goes. When I started this radio show about 2.5 years ago, I made this decision not to involve politics in any discussions with my guests or anything that I wanted to say, and for the most part, I've been able to do that. And I plan on doing that tonight as well. But I feel like I need to get this off my chest. We've had to deal with COVID-19 for over a year and a half now. And over that time, we've had several missteps along the way. And there's been so much disinformation and misinformation. It's so hard to know what's the truth. But here is the truth as I see it. This insidious virus will not magically go away on its own. It's going to require all of us, every single one of us, all across the world, to mitigate it. And I fully understand that personal freedoms should be adhered to, because that's the cornerstone to our existence. But when we're talking about our personal health and our well-being, that's where freedom should take a back seat to looking after our fellow man. For every incredibly ludicrous story about how the vaccine shot has a chip in it, or it's the mark of the beast, you also hear stories of how responsible scientists have stayed on top of this virus even before this pandemic ravaged the world. The science folks, it was already in place years in advance before they developed this version of the vaccine. And it wasn't rushed, folks. I'm telling you, it wasn't rushed. But here's the thing that really gnaws at me. Before the vaccination was approved and thousands of people were dying every single day, We were all hoping that we could somehow witness how the virus would magically wane and disappear. Well, that didn't happen. And when the vaccine approved, it all became political for some reason. Did we say that when the polio vaccine was introduced, or the chicken pox vaccine, or smallpox vaccine? You know, scientists worked years to develop a working vaccine, and when it was proven to work, most everyone took the shot willingly. So what changed? Why would anyone in their right mind not take a vaccine that would keep them out of the hospital, or possibly the worst thing ever, death? And we witnessed that with what Denise was talking about with her mother. We know that even though those who've taken the shot can still get COVID, but the negative results are minimal. How many times have you heard stories of people who didn't get the shot and they're on their last breath telling anyone within earshot that they wish they had taken the vaccine? There are just too many to count. But the ramifications don't end there. Hospitals have been deluged once again because the Delta variant has caused an even worse situation because there's limited rooms for all the COVID patients. What has made it equally devastating is how people who are seriously ill with something other than COVID can't be admitted to the hospital and have to find another hospital that can take them. And I want to read you something that I saw on Instagram, and this came from someone, and it's called Ray Demonia lived his whole life in Coleman, Alabama, but he did not die there. Instead, he died 200 miles away across state lines. This is his obituary. Mr. Demonia's warm, loving, sweet obituary in his hometown paper is not just a local story about this loss for the family and for Coleman. Because when Mr. Demonia's family published their own obituary of him, they included this at the end. In honor of Ray, please get vaccinated if you have not, in an effort to free up resources for non-COVID related emergencies. Due to COVID-19, Coleman Regional Emergency Center staff contacted 43 hospitals in 3 states in search of a cardiac ICU bed and finally located one in Meridian, Mississippi. You would not want any other family to go through what his did. For everyone who says that getting a and what his family has just said about his death. Your decision about your vaccine may feel personal to you, and I get it, but you live in a society, you live in a country, and your decision about your vaccine is ultimately the decision that fills up hospital beds. That makes all the difference to your society, your community, and your country. It makes all the difference as to whether a man like Ray Demonia gets that ICU bed or not. Other people's decisions about their vaccine made the decision for him as to whether or not he can get the critical care he needed. I really wanted to read that. I think it's really important. And look, the human race, we've endured centuries of battling many life-changing events, and too many to talk about now, but it's up to the human race to take care of each other. To be selfish and say nobody is going to tell me what to do, I understand that you're right, but to come to me when your family member or friend or colleague contracts the virus because they get seriously ill or sadly dies because you unknowingly pass it on to them, or worse yet, you get it. Nobody is immune to getting this virus. My hope is someone who is listening or watching this heeds my words. Again, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is the sooner we put this virus in our rearview mirror, the sooner we can all resume some semblance of normalcy. Indifference and self-revolution will only make this disease go on indefinitely. So that's what my opinion is. And you're welcome to disagree with this, but this, I mean, talking with Denise about what she went through and dealing with it, I think it was important for me to say that. So that's it, folks. Denise, thank you. Hoping that gave us some solace.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, folks. If you want to get a hold of Denise Michelle, look up her website and order her book. And hopefully you'll be affected just like I am affected by having Denise on my show. Thanks again for coming on my show. So as I end all my shows, I want everyone to smile infectiously, laugh generally, live courageously, and love unconditionally. I believe in all of you. Have a great week, folks.